Morning, everyone. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. It is a great pleasure to be your first presenter today. Today we are looking at the history of Aotearoa in the years 1800s to 1866. My name is Velonika, and I'm happy to share the platform with my partner, Aroha. We will be looking at specific events and activities that happened during our time, historical events that happened during our time. We'll take a look at the history of Te Riti o Waitangi and the educational acts established during our time. Also, we will be looking at social, political, and cultural issues. So me and Aroha will share our findings during that time. Also, we'll be looking at the Te Riti o Waitangi principle and the application and education system, and share our thoughts about the shaping of education in Aotearoa, and we'll end it up with our whakataki. So these are the historical events that happened during our time, which is the time of the missionary schools, the time of missionaries setting up schools around New Zealand. In 1888, the Anglican Mission School started and established in New Zealand. 1816. In 1823, the Wesleyville School established and the Roman Catholic Mission School in 1838. And here are some of the years that, the historical years that the Treaty of Waitangi was established in 1840, 1847 to Education Ordinance Act, and 1852 the Constitution Act. So these are the acts that happened during our time. The Treaty and the Education Ordinance Act 1847 that I'll be basing my social, political, and social issues as well as Aroha. Social issue number one is loss of freedom of education. So this is how the Maori people were having a form of education during that time. Traditional form of education took place in the Whare Wamana, which is where the, you can see, I've created a hierarchy that in my findings of how I see the high chief, the top of the hierarchy, the Ramatira, that is a leader in the hapu, and Tohunga, that is the experts or the specialists who taught teaching this whakapapa, karakia, tatai, aroranga, tribal history, practical skills, and tirama in the wharewama. Life in the villages. Maori had a well-instituted tradition of knowledge, learning, and teaching, which was integral to their culture, their social education, and their daily living. And this is how they lived inside their families, sharing the knowledge of, as one of my interviews with one of the teachers in Mangere is, to share the knowledge of how Maori people, the elders, the kaumatua, or the experts in various areas, for example, in hunting, fishing, weaving, they share their knowledge to the young ones. And that's how they passed on their traditional cultures to their younger generation. And what happens inside their families, there was values of manamatanga, kaitiakitanga, manakitanga, kotakitanga, raipua, moriora. During the mission school's time, and then there was the time of the Education Ordinance Act, that is when the English curriculum comes in, or the national system was used inside schools. And Maori people want to send their children to school because they were looking at, this is their way out of poverty or the way to wealth. And that they did not know that it is a pathway of the Europeans to diminish their traditional value of education, which is the one that I shared with you, the the way of living inside their communities and the way they passed on their knowledge, Aroha passed on their traditional knowledge to their future leaders in their tribes.
Kia ora. So I'm going to give you a short overview of about the tension between social class and access to education in the early 1800s, a time when formal education was far from universal. Back then, education was largely a privilege of the upper and middle classes. If you were poor, chances are you didn't go to school, you went to mahi. Many working class children spent their days in factories, on farms, or doing domestic labor instead of learning to read or write. Kind of a sore subject. Definitely had to ask me this one. This wasn't just because families needed the income, but also because there was very little public funding for schools. Governments were reluctant to invest in mass education before the 1870s. Instead, it was left to religious and charitable groups like Sunday schools, Montessori schools, to provide any learning opportunities at all for the poor children. Even then, access was limited. Why the hesitation to educate the working class? Many elites feared that giving too much education to poor children would disrupt the social order. They worried it might reduce the labor force or even inspire rebellion. In other words, education was seen as something that should stay in the hands of the right social classes. This inequality created a deep tension in society between the need for a skilled and literate population and the desire to maintain the existing class structure. The tension is a key part of how modern education systems eventually developed. Hence the cool picture.
Our political issue number 1, the New Zealand Constitution Act 1852. This is another act that was established during our timeline. This under the section 17 of this Constitution Act, the government make rules for the education system. In the legislative law, the government decentralize schools. That means they assign each region to have their schools and make their own education system. And they also assigned councils to establish those systems in their own region. And what happens with this, right, is that the government is allowing those councils to make their own rules, and that creates the difference between the education system across the country, because what is happening is this act works together with another act of the Education Ordinance Act, which is if one school is using English in the English curriculum, that means the government will grant them more funds, and that creates the difference between the school reaches across the country. For example, in the 1860s, Nelson and Otago had more efficient system than other schools here in Auckland. So they have more resources. So we can witness that over here as well in the Auckland schools. We are right across to the King's College, but they have more resources than our kids who are here in our schools themselves. So that creates the inequality of this act across the regions in New Zealand in the education system.
All right. I'm now going to give a small brief on the political tension surrounding Māori education in the 1800s, specifically struggle for control between missionary societies and colonial government. In the early 1800s, education for Māori was largely led by missionaries, such as Church Missionary Society. These schools focused on Christian teachings, literacy, and often used Te Reo Māori as the language of instruction. For many Māori, these schools offered valuable skills while allowing them to stay connected to their language and culture. However, everything began to shift after the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. The British colonial government started asserting control over many aspects of Māori life, including education. One key figure was Governor George Grey. In 1847, he introduced the Education Ordinance, which tied government funding to strict conditions. Schools had to be taught in English, include industrial or vocational training, and promote Christian values. These policies were designed to assimilate Māori into British ways of life and encourage loyalty to the crown. This created serious political tension. Missionaries wanted to keep control over education, especially religious content, while the government saw education as a tool for colonial control. The clash between the missionary and the government aims highlights how education was used, not just to teach, but to shape identity and political power.
Yeah, we come to our culture issue. Te Reo Māori suppression. This issue comes in when the Education Ordinance Act in 1847 was introduced, where the English curriculum was enforced inside schools. And it gives the government the right to inspect schools as well, to monitor the schools so that they can provide more funds for them. As you can witness on our picture here in Mission School at Ethiopia, this picture, it captures the school was opened in 1843 under Anglican mission, Benjamin Ashworth by 1851. The school was receiving annual funds under the Education Act 1847. I came across an article printed in the Herald. This is a statement that I captured from one of the articles of the Māori recent ex-Prime Minister of Māori Affairs, ex-Minister of Māori Affairs, where he said when he started school, Māori was the only language he knew. As soon as he passed through the gate, he was required to leave his language and culture behind. This is a witness of how this act impacted the lives of the children during the time of the 1800s. And I too can feel the impact because I am Pacific and I would be on the same boat as these people.
So within the cultural aspects of my research, here's a brief overview of my findings. I've titled it The Conflict and the Clash, Te Reo Māori versus English. In the early 1800s, missionary schools taught literacy in Te Reo Māori, and Māori communities embraced this. For them, reading and writing were powerful tools, helping preserve oral histories, access the Bible, and engage in diplomacy with Pākehā. However, after the Education Ordinance of 1847, this is it right here, the colonial government pushed for English-only instruction. English was promoted as a tool of civilization, while Te Reo Māori was gradually excluded from classrooms. The shift wasn't just about language, it was about control. As te reo was pushed out, many Māori began to resist schools that undermined their identity. At the same time, there was a deeper tension between mātauranga, traditional Māori knowledge, and the Western curriculum brought in by missionaries and the state. Māori education had always been rooted in the whānau and iwi, focusing on genealogy, environment, and spirituality. But colonial education systems dismissed this as primitive and replaced it with reading, writing, and industrial skills tailored to European values. These schools were designed to create obedient Christian workers, not critical thinkers or future Māori leaders. Māori customs and beliefs were often condemned, and this alienated many communities from formal schooling altogether. The long-term impact of this would be felt for generations.
Te Tuiri o Waitangi, 1840. It was written by this man, William Hobson, and translated by the missionary, Henry Williams. As you can see, there's only two people. I don't see any Māori people there creating this, drafting this. And there were two versions, the Māori and the English version, in which I come across that, yes, I totally agree that there is a difference between the translation from English to Māori, which created a lot of tensions in the country. There were 3 articles in the treaty. Article 1, where it says, in the English version, the Māori cede the sovereignty, and that word translated in Māori as kawanatanga, which means covenants in Māori. Article 2, in English, Māori are guaranteed to have all rights and possession of their properties, but when it's translated, tino rangatiratanga, it means full authority pledged onto the Queen over Māori tauma, which is around the lands, the mountains, the oceans, and even the knowledge. And article number 3, Māori are given the rights and privileges of British subjects. So, in relation to the principles that we have in the Treaty of Waitangi, which is partnership, participation, and protection, these 3 articles has been built to relate so that it can build the bridges between this old treaty to the modern law that we have right now, which is they're trying to connect us in a modern society that we have now to the mistakes that was printed on the Treaty of Waitangi.
To Treaty of Waitangi, the participation principle, that promised Māori an active role in decision-making and governance. Yet in the early colonial period, this principle was often dismissed, with Māori voices sidelined or used to advance colonial agendas. Figures such as Wairau Maihi Te Kaheke,
Absolutely.
Figures such as Wairau Maihi Te Kaheke contributed valuable knowledge and perspectives, but without recognition, authority, or genuine influence over decisions that affected Māori people. So if you remember back a couple of slides, there was a man named George Gray, governor. He took his work and pushed it through as his own. This is, white.
Speak it.
There's more to it. Okay, that's me.
I've chosen partnership to talk about the principle, the three principles, because it stands out of how I noticed that there was no partnership drawn when the treaty was drawn. And this partnership principle, it stands out because now it connects Māori people to the treaty. Now that builds the bridge between the Māori people and the British treaty that was signed. The introduction of the Education Act in 1874, which overruled Māori authority, that overruled was built now, introducing this partnership principle in a modern law.
Okay, who can see themselves?
Yeah,
I think I'm. I can see my body.
So, social, political, and cultural tensions we've covered, okay? The groundwork for Aotearoa's education system. Education was largely inaccessible to many, especially Māori and the working class, while colonial policies suppressed te reo and mātauranga Māori. Politically, debates over control led to fragmented systems. These early injustices still shape our education landscape today. The Māori right to participate promised under Te Tiriti is now being more actively upheld through initiatives like Te Pāti Māori, co-governance is the word, and the New Zealand curriculum refresh that we all love. Yes, signalling a shift toward genuine tino and Ngāti Mastanga.
Okay, and we end our presentation with Whakataki. He iti tangata, e tupu, e iti toki, e iti tonu, equal. It translates a small person grows, but a small toki stays small. It reflects on how time grows knowledge and how a child's brain advances in terms of learning, knowing, and practicing. This is the science of learning that we are discovering in our learning, reading, and teaching Kaikapi. Our tamariki are our future. I believe education is the key to success. Our people deserve a place in the podium. If the Europeans have taught us the Western worldview, we can utilize that to strengthen our traditions in our homes through teaching our children the basic knowledge of reading and writing using the pen and paper the Pākehā invented. Let us use the fabrics the Pākehā invented to dress appropriately, to perform our waiata, our pesi, our kapahaka, our siva samoa, our language of respect, to speak and uplift our community and society. Thank you.